For the last year, all it's been is just the same drivel from Trump as he's kept telling us that we have nothing he needs. No lumber, no cars, no oil, no nothing. Yeah, right. And now, while Washington pauses its 50% tariff for a couple more days and starts bargaining its own tariffs down, Donald Trump suddenly wants to talk about a Canadian oil pipeline. He spent 7 months saying Canada is useless, and now he wants our booze back on the shelves and our pipe back in the ground in the same email. You know what that sounds like? Someone who is desperate for a win because his numbers and popularity are in the toilet.
And look at what is happening around the pipeline announcement. Washington threatened 50% on about $28 billion in Canadian goods. 3 days later, Washington is offering to cut its own tariffs in half. And they're asking Ottawa to put liquor back on the shelves, which Ottawa doesn't even have jurisdiction over. Mark Carney, he did not cave. And the premiers, they did not fold. And Donald Trump posted an AI picture of himself pulling Keystone XL out of its grave.
The threat, it started at 50, right? And somehow the negotiation has ended up with Washington bargaining against Washington, which gives you a pretty good idea where the pressure is right now. Trump announced that Canada and the US have a deal, capital letters and everything, but then added that it was still subject to finalizing the documents. Mark Carney's version was rather less theatrical. Substantial progress has been made, but there's still important work to do.
Once again, Canadian companies that were told a tariff was definitely arriving have watched the clock run down and the deadline move.
I keep thinking about the strangest part of this proposed deal, though, because one of Washington's biggest demands is still something that Mark Carney can't actually deliver. The White House wants American wine and bourbon back on Canadian liquor store shelves. Prime Minister Carney has asked the premiers to do that, but he can't walk into the LCBO, the SAQ, or a BC liquor store and start rearranging the shelves themselves.
And those shelves, they have been brutal for leverage. Before Ontario pulled U.S. products, the LCB alone was moving up to $965 million a year in American alcohol. Across Canada, American alcohol imports fell by roughly 81% after the retaliatory bans. That landed directly on wineries, distilleries, and farm state politicians who suddenly watched an export market vanish for more than a year. So, of course, Washington keeps bringing up booze. Sure, it's small compared to the whole trading relationship, but it's the one pain that American producers feel every single week.
Which is why Prime Minister Carney's move was so clever. He asked the premiers to consider restoring American alcohol as part of a larger agreement. He asked, not ordered. Now, each premier has to decide if what Trump is offering is actually enough to give up a card they own. And Washington suddenly learns what negotiating with a federation actually means.
And this is where Team Canada gets complicated, because unity doesn't mean everyone wants the same thing. Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston has said that he's prepared to work with Prime Minister Carney if putting American alcohol back helps land a solid agreement. Saskatchewan and Alberta, well, they're in a different spot altogether because American alcohol is already being sold there, so they have less to give and different things to get.
British Columbia is the anchor on the other side of the country. Premier David Eby said just a few weeks ago that there was not a chance in hell that American alcohol was going back on BC shelves under pressure from Trump. Quebec has said it could consider bringing some U.S. wine back, but only if Quebec sees real gains on aluminum, manufacturing, and forestry, while supply management on dairy stays a red line. Ontario, well, he kind of sits in the middle. Doug Ford says he could put American product back if Canada gets meaningful and fair relief for steel, autos, and manufacturing.
So think about what that means at the negotiating table. Ontario cares enormously about auto and steel. BC cares enormously about lumber, where Canadian softwood is still facing combined U.S. duties of roughly 35% before you add other measures. And there is no big lumber breakthrough in this framework at all. So I understand where Eby's coming from. Now, Quebec, they have aluminum, forestry, and dairy put together. Alberta wants energy infrastructure. Now, Washington, it doesn't need to beat Canada all at once if it can peel one province at a time with a side promise.
Now, Carlo Dade has already been worrying about this divide and conquer problem for months. And you know what? He's right. Canada's provinces have unusually large power over the very things that Trump wants. So Prime Minister Carney cannot just sign them away from a desk. The clearance sale here is over, people, and Canada is not a captive resource colony that hands over shelves when Washington raises its voice. Right now, that wall is holding, and Washington, they know it.
Which brings us to the pipeline that suddenly came back from the dead exactly at the right time for Trump. Hours before that 50% tariff was supposed to land, Donald Trump posted that Keystone XL may be awoken from the grave, and then an AI image of himself doing the resurrection. Now, for more than a year, we've heard the same line. In March 2025, he said, "We don't need trees from Canada. We don't need cars from Canada. We don't need energy from Canada. We don't need anything from Canada." That's my bad Trump version.
No, I think it's good.
Oh, right. And then he said versions of that again and again. And now a Canadian heavy crude pipeline is important enough to bundle it into a fake trade announcement.
Yeah, love the timing here. When you have to cut your own tariffs in half and you still need a headline for his base back home, what do? You dig up a pipeline. And here's a part that Washington left out of that post, though. The project he's talking about, it already exists in a new form, and it's not his. South Bow, the company spun out of TC Energy that was originally part of the Keystone XL Pipeline, has been building the Prairie connector using part of what was already installed for Keystone. About 150 kilometers of pipe is already in the ground. 2 pump stations are already built. 9 customers are signed for 20 years. That's 465,000 barrels a day in firm commitments.
And on the American side, Bridger Pipeline is building the Southern Connection. Trump already granted Bridger its presidential cross-border permit on April 30th. So, when the post went up this week, the industry had already been working on a commercially backed version of this idea for months. South Bow is targeting a final investment decision around the middle of 2027. So what's heading towards the decision is a company using pipe already in the ground with stations already standing and customers already contracted. Washington is trying to put a presidential banner on a job site that was already open.
Now, there is still one huge problem, and South Bow talks about it openly. Permit durability. Companies are being asked to spend billions on infrastructure that lasts decades, and everyone saw what happened last time. When Biden came in, he canceled the Keystone XL presidential permit on day 1 in 2021.
And this is what changes the whole psychology compared to the first Keystone fight. Back then, Canadian producers desperately needed more pipe, and the United States was overwhelmingly the destination. Now, Canada still sells the vast majority of its crude south, but Canada, we finally have another door. The Trans Mountain can move about 890,000 barrels a day to the Pacific coast, and it's been running close to maximum capacity. Since the expansion opened, China went from buying roughly 7,000 barrels a day on average to 207,000 barrels a day. In 2025, more than 65% of the oil shipped from that marine terminal went to Asian markets.
Yeah, Trans Mountain is already working on optimization that could take it from about 890,000 towards 1.9 million barrels a day without building a whole new corridor. So when Trump says, we will give Canadian oil another route into the United States, Canada can listen without acting like there's actually only one customer outside that store. U.S. refiners want that heavy crude because their plants were built for it. We all know that. You can't run light Texas crude through a heavy sour refinery in the Midwest or Gulf and get the same output. Those refineries were built for Western Canadian select, the way a deep fryer at the Iowa State Fair is built for batter. You can try and pour something else in there, but you won't get what you came for.
And that is why Prime Minister Carney can afford to let South Bow chase government assurances on permit durability before anyone pours concrete. South Bow wants a decision by 2027 and construction before the next U.S. administration takes office in 2029. If we spend the money, how do we know that the next president doesn't tear up the paperwork again?
It's this, right? Washington, they want the headline now. Trump needs it. Canada, we want the guarantee.
Washington started this round threatening 50% on roughly $28 billion.
3 days later, Washington is discussing cutting steel and aluminum to 25% and autos to around 15%, which will come to about 7.5% effective if it meets CUSMA content. Then, he's also reaching for a Canadian pipeline to package the outcome as a victory for his base. Listen, Canada kept supply management as a red line. They kept the provincial leverage on the shelves. And we've kept another commercially useful oil route in our pocket. If that's the shape of this agreement, then Canadians should feel good about how 7 months of refusing to panic has changed the actual conversation.
So the real test over the next couple of days is what Canada trades for those tariff cuts, whether the premiers stay coordinated and whether lumber communities are told to wait for another round. Prime Minister Carney has asked the premiers to restore American alcohol. Asking and getting are two very different things in a federation. And who says Canada will buy even if it does return?
Trump will probably walk away with a picture beside a pipeline announcement and tell his base that he brought Keystone back from the dead. Fine. Let him take the photo op. Canada will take lower steel tariffs, lower auto tariffs, our dairy system intact, and another way to get our oil to customers who actually want it.
So tell us what you think. Should the provinces put American alcohol back on the shelves if steel drops to 25% and autos fall to 15%?
Or should Canada keep that leverage until Washington moves further on steel, autos, or lumber? Let us know in the comments because we want to hear from you on this one. This trade stuff is important.
And while you're down there, check out our pinned comment for all the links to the fun stuff, like our Substack, which is getting spicy.
And don't forget to give this a like, a hype, and a share so other people can weigh in on this as well.
Thanks for watching, everyone, and supporting our independent commentary.
We'll see you tomorrow.
Ciao for now.